Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor Margaret Kelleher from the School of English, Drama and Film here at UCD. Farum Fáilte Fuir Queen, Roiv Galair, Benvindos, Queros Amigos, and welcome everyone. I think we have at least 3 national languages in play in our country this evening. Warm welcome to Ambassador Cardoso, to his colleague Ambassador Bernal, who's with us from the Ambassador from the Argentine Republic. Also welcome members of the diplomatic mission of Brazil who are here to join their colleague. Our special guests, Mrs. Solange Estegoy Cardoso, Beatriz Kopschitz Bastos, Marcelos Lima, Burjuk and Serkan Gulek, who are joining us this evening. And it's wonderful to have many colleagues from the HEA, from UCD and elsewhere here, and indeed many friends of the Ambassador. We're particularly pleased that we're also recording this evening's lecture, and it becomes the 3rd in our series of Maria Helena Kopschitz lectures. And for those of you who are joining us for this lecture, let me explain that this initiative was established 2 years ago to commemorate and honour the work of Maria Helena Kopschitz, who was a leading scholar in Irish literary studies in Brazil, and who did so much to foster the study and love, really, of Irish literature and culture in Brazil. Those of us who have been with us from the beginning know that the first lecture was a wonderful lecture by her niece, Beatriz Kopschitz Bastos, about Maria Helena's work and legacy. And our second lecture was given earlier this year by Professor José Roberto O'Shea from UCD, who gave us a wonderful lecture on the translations of James Joyce's work in Brazil, Federal University of Santa Catarina. I mentioned those 2 lectures also to remind you that they are viewable, which is a wonderful legacy, as this one will be. And finally, to mention that the Kopschitz initiative in UCD includes a scholarship which allows a scholarship holder in the MA in Anglo-Irish Literature and Drama to be with us every year. And we're delighted that we have the 3rd scholarship holder, Paula Marino. But I do want to begin by saluting the personal and professional generosity of the Kopschitz Bastos Lima family that makes this initiative possible. It's a particular honour to introduce our speaker then for this 3rd lecture, His Excellency Ambassador Afonso José Sena Cardoso, Ambassador of Brazil. He began his career in the Brazilian civil service at the Ministry of External Relations, and his first of many overseas postings was to Budapest, where he served from 1970 to 1973. His degree in Portuguese and Latin was followed by his entry to the Brazilian Diplomatic Academy, where he began his career as 3rd Secretary, and postings to Washington and to Montevideo followed. From 1990 to 1993, he was assigned to the Brazilian mission at the United Nations. In 1994 to Santiago. From 1999 to 2004 as Deputy Representative for Brazil to the Latin American Integration Association. In 2008, Ambassador to Angola, and prior to his posting here, he was the Brazilian Consul General in Toronto, Canada. He's been Ambassador to the Republic of Ireland since 2014, and one of the many things that struck me in the preparations for this evening was the warmth of the responses to the invitations, both from those who could be here and the many people who, due to work commitments, could not be here, and who very much asked for their good wishes to be sent to Afonso and Solange, and to salute the wonderful work that you have done for our Irish-Brazilian relations in your time here. So it is particularly, I think, wonderful to salute that this evening. Ambassador.
Boa noite. I will not try to say it in Gaelic. No. Good evening. I know that this may be an anticlimactic starter, but it is my duty, and so forth is the right thing to do. The views I'm about to express are strictly personal. My government and my fellow members should not be blamed for them. Having done the disclaimer, let's begin. I feel very honored by the invitation to address you tonight in the annual celebration of the Maria Helena Kopschitz Scholarship here at UCD. It shows how positive cooperation in education and culture can be to bilateral relations. The role played by UCD in the Irish-Brazilian relationship, for the very same reason, is by all means highly commendable too. As a rule of thumb, career diplomats do not deliver ravishing lectures. According to the press, last time the Brazilian government discussed which would be the right profile for a spokesperson, the only consensus they could reach was to pick up a career diplomat for the insipid and the diluted statements and the obsession for accuracy and balance career diplomats are well known for, at least in Brazil. So if we ever make the news, you can bet that something went wrong and is out of control. Our good friends Beatrice and Margaret were kind enough to leave it up to me the election or the theme of this chat. I resist the temptation to make a review of the bilateral relations in the last 3 years or so, a natural choice for someone who will retire next April, but also the mandatory subject of my official compte rendu at the end of my tenure. I could not venture neither into an analysis of Ireland, her present and future, for the clear deficit of knowledge to even attempt it. Back to square one, then. Let's talk about Brazil. Supposedly, that is the subject that I should master, although I must say that quite often diplomats develop a tendency to favor long-term approaches built upon rather simple categories and models for the sake of simplicity. Chances are, therefore, the image we make of our own country may lack the vivid colors of passion and the mesmerizing force of drama. Worse yet, it may look unreal and excessively idealized. While promise or curse, the sentence by Stefan Zweig back in the 40s, Brazil, country of the future, keeps haunting us as the stop-go economy reproduces the chicken flights that so often end up in painful landings. Yet, progress is undeniable. On many aspects, one can say future is already there. And the 6th or 7th largest economy in the world, it depends on the floating currency rate of the day, gradually shows sounder and larger foundations for further jumps forward. Unfortunately, economic growth and social development are a discontinuous and uneven process. Corruption, a universal plague that has affected Brazilians so much, is once again gradually being brought under control. Fear or belief that wrongdoings will remain unpunished begins to phase out. For the first time in our history, people no longer take for granted that one might be beyond the reach of law and justice. Fiscal responsibility, enhanced government transparency, untainted autonomy of the judiciary, and efficiency of the public prosecution provide the consecutive layers required for change. The cacophony of lawsuits and press headlines that follows is just part of the narrative. Slowly, and not without setbacks, Representative democracy and its institutions show the resilience in everyday life and encompass the whole scope of Brazilian society. Little by little, like whispering in a tempest, at a despairingly slow pace for so many of us, pressed by the urgency of our needs. Eppur si muove. Well, who said unanimity was possible or even desirable? After all, if it's true that in the long run we will be dead, it's no lesser true countries, nations, do not blossom overnight. Bad luck for us, who live in the short, at the best, in the medium-term dimension. By definition, we will miss them blossoming. But we can always try to foresee the flowers in the buds of today. Hopefully, then, better luck for our descendants. By the way, who are they? How do they look like? What do they think? Which are their dreams and wishes? For centuries, Brazil was home to a decreasing number of indigenous people. An ever-increasing number of black slaves brought from Africa, and scattered groups of Portuguese, almost a third of them Muslims and Jews, let's say gently, converted by the Inquisition to the Roman Catholic faith. By the 1850s, as slavery began to be outlawed, gradually, of course, flags were flown campaigning for an Europeanization of our vast territory. Upon completion of the abolition process of slavery in 1888, notwithstanding, hundreds of thousands of migrants had to be rushed in from Europe, Middle East, Far East Asia, everywhere in short, to keep the economy running. So there is really no exaggeration when I say there is at least one story of immigration in every Brazilian family. Transitions are quite often troublesome. The population of the city of São Paulo, for one, doubled in just 1 year at the very beginning of the 20th century. No wonder the Modern Art Week motto of the 1922 was how to define Brazilian identity. Tupi, which is the name of a group of tribes of the first Brazilians, or not Tupi? That was the question in Oswald de Andrade's Anthropophagy Cultural Manifesto. I'm only concerned with what's not mine. Law of man, law of the cannibal. End of quotation. Therefore, what's not mine, and I value, whoever is not me, and I admire, I will incorporate, so that I can be as brave and wise as he is, or to be more precise, was. No doubt, the 20th century Brazilians were very different from our First Nations. The cultural anthropophagy became, however, part of their legacy, a trait that will make us so open to what is new and indifferent or even averse to tradition. But it will take us decades, successive industrialization cycles, persistent endeavors to equate the challenges of serious social and infrastructure deficits to reach another breaking point as transcending as that one back in the 20s. It happened when the, once again gradual, negotiated transition from dictatorship to representative democracy was over in the mid-80s. Almost 50 years of extensive important changes in the economy and our culture in motion had brought us to another formative stage. It was by then also that we began to effectively realize who we actually are, or we think we are. A single nation of more than 200 million people with just one language and one culture, composed by multiple and diverse races, ethnicities, cultures, languages, and traditions. In this life of ours, spent mostly on the road, Solange and I soon learned to recognize who was or who was not a Brazilian. The answer is easy, although unexpected. It shows up in the shoes, in the clothes, or the way one walks down the street. Color, race, accent, even gastronomical preference won't be of much value in that exercise. By the time the military went back to their quarters, Brazilians began to understand in our bones that we are a singular continental country with a mulatto, mestizo face and creative brown-color soul, who lives according to institutions shaped after the Greek-Roman model that, by the way, defines the Western world. We found out as well that despite our size and relative strength, we would rather be known for our soft power and peaceful vocation, regardless of the increasing degree of violence in our society, a complex feature that unquestionably reflects not only the magnitude of income inequity, but also the footprint of slavery on its victims and its perpetrators alike. Younger fellow countrymen who were spared the experience of 1,700 yearly inflation, who were spared the sorrows and the arbitrary and nonsensical nature of dictatorship, share most the same views and sentiments of previous generations. But they are not only just more of the same. If on one hand they seem to take freedom of thought and speech for granted, on the other, they are more concerned with the environment and therefore the sustainability of economic growth and social development. Rather paradoxically, they seem to feel so powerful and hopeless at the same time. For them, and some of their parents alike, global dimension is a simple and convenient attribute of reality, regardless of the anti-globalization speech they fervently voice now and then. After all, one is so often under depression that it suffers to Twitter calls for action to bring in spring in Arab countries or plebiscitary democracy on our streets. Like their peers around the world, younger Brazilians don't trust politicians who, one must recognize, haven't always deserved to be treated otherwise. Despite the mistrust and episodes of disbelief, new Brazilian generations, empowered by technology at practically everyone's reach, seem they too decided to change the world now and for good. Long live their dreams and resolution. But where shall we go to from now? A step at a time, gradually, as it has been the case throughout our history and seems to be in the nature itself of whales, elephants, and continental countries like ours. In one of his most recent lyrics, Tom Zé, an 80-year-old Brazilian musician who has managed to keep a sharp, critical eye on daily life, said about the so-called Generation Y something along these lines. Come quickly, my darling. Within a few years, we will have to govern. Unfortunately, we shall have to govern. And what about our ideals then? Who among us would have imagined them piled up on the same waste track of the bourgeoisie misdeeds? Well, I don't share Tom's skepticism in full. In the case of Brazil, despite the serious economic challenges, chances are we will succeed in resuming very soon the gradual but sound road that has already enabled us to reduce little the blatant inequity in the distribution of wealth, to enlarge the domestic market, and thus to help pave the way for additional economic growth and widespread citizenship. New and badly needed opportunities of employment begin to be found in the soft power growing economy, as well as in an ever enlarged participation of the country in the international system. The overall option for more sustainable and environmentally friendly solutions will play for sure an important role too in our efforts to compensate for the erosion of employment markets that one can see worldwide. By the end of the day, we improve at local level, regionally, as a nation, gradually, not without setbacks, but on track, in a clearly ascending curve towards the future. Was it that Stefan Zweig had in mind? Certainly, the greatest and most worrisome demanding task as of now is to better adjust our political system so that it may ensure good governance, while preserving and further reinforcing the representative democracy we fought for. There is no such thing as one size fits all. One can and frequently does learn from another's experience, but solutions can be seldom replicated. Therefore, although phenomena such as the lack of confidence in the political activity and actors, the proliferation of legitimate but powerless and inarticulate political parties, the growing compulsion for one-sided and simplistic answers to really complex questions are not a Brazilian idiocracy, we are all on our own when we come to the crucial moment of deciding and reacting to those and many other important questions. In order to be more effective brokers of the astounding plurality of interests in a society, which is the key function they should be expected to perform, politicians badly need to be seen and acknowledged as more reliable. On the other hand, each one of us should pay more attention to the political responsibility of our own votes, as well as of our omissions and indifference. There is no foolproof recipe, neither, nor am I the most able person to propose one. I will leave you, therefore, with unanswered questions. But I would really rejoice if, after all, I could make just one point. Humanities, art, will be once more essential tools in this quest we have to live up to. When ideology played a more dominant role in politics and in everyday life, we learned rationally and emotionally and debated about it in novels, murals, songs, and poems. Culture was and has been the playing field for a transcendental debate. One should never minimize the fact that in countries such as Ireland or Brazil, it is from the national culture we derive our unity and identity. Most of the issues that are or should be already at the center of the political debate, many of them issues of conscience, require much more information and would for sure benefit from new readings so that we could better understand and feel them more comprehensively and in depth. No need for a long enumeration. It suffices to mention a few of them, from remote murder by drone to, let's say it, revealing and threatening burkinis on the beach, from thousands of wandering, starving refugees and displaced persons to equally relevant questions concerning the long overdue empowerment of women and of the most vulnerable in our societies. From the invasion of our privacy to the responsible use of social media, mass and earmarked character assassination. From the white man's burden to the so-called right to intervene. From the well-intended responsibility to protect to the responsibility in protecting. If we are to agree on the most suitable answers to some of those pressing challenges, we will need politicians. But politicians alone will not be capable of redeeming the importance of politics, thereby reinvigorating its transforming power so clearly demanded domestically and at the international level. The speed of twittered catchwords will never make it for their inconsequential shallowness. The computer, the tablet, the smartphone don't make me less stupid. Consumers, electors, citizens have to do their part. After all, it's just our lives that are at stake, and they are, every single one of them, too much important to be left at the discretion of an ever larger number of incoherent populist leaders and their preposterous decisions. International systems and its institutions are not better off. At that level, too, there is a urgent need to improve governance and ensure more democratic procedures as well. And with this reasoning, we hopefully come to solid ground again. This already long circumnavigation was simply meant for making the point that culture is not only an academic issue, but a political one. The answers to those questions, who are they? How do they look like? What do they think? Which are their dreams and wishes will be dictated by culture to a great extent. From my part, I'm very glad to see how positive an input the Maria Helena Kopschitz Scholarship here at UCD is to the development of the dialogue between Ireland and Brazil, and to the enticing call on us by the sirens of culture. Let's not make ourselves deaf to this call. Humanities, art, may once again help us compose the answers we need, or at least help us recognize whatever should be discarded as clear non-starters. Just recently, we could see with great concern how some of the very same winners of causes as important as the acceptance or rejection of the peace agreement in Colombia or Brexit in the UK ended up surprised by the disquieting range and implications of their own victories. Humanities, art, have still many lessons to teach us. They excel alone in making us ponder over options and the reach of our arms, the wisdom of our decisions and our responsibility for them. Dear friends, as my colleagues and efficient revisers Luis César Gasser and Danielle Clarke can witness, for reasons of agenda, I had drafted this text well before the recent USA elections and even more recent death of Fidel Castro, an icon of my generation in Latin America. If it had been otherwise, I would have certainly been tempted to make a few additional remarks and establish some parallels between the course of events in Brazil and the USA, or to comment on the power of ideas, the nature of revolution, and the tenuous drawing line that separate utopia from dystopia. Since it was not the case, I stayed focused on my home country, bearing in mind the angry independent manifestants back in 2013, who did not seem to know exactly what they wanted, but knew very well and shouted it loudly that they were against everything that was there for them to see and live as their immediate reality. In that endeavor, I tried once more to understand why so much intolerance and stupidity could be allowed to distort and almost block political debate in occasions such as the constitutional political procedures that led to the impeachment of a president and her replacement by the vice president elected with her. In that effort, I continue to wonder how to respond to the growing mistrust in political systems, institutions, and politicians. How to better confront the hatred calls for irresponsible, if not insane actions that resemble so much the fascist Viva la Muerte, even when they allegedly aim at denouncing it and its multiple disguises. Perhaps the way out of this march to deconstruction is to learn how to live in uncertainty, how to deal with doubt without being paralyzed by it, how to respect and enjoy the opportunity of listening to different and innovative views, how to imagine ourselves in the other shoes, how not to indulge in resentment, and how to be able to feel the sea in a drop of water. To face these challenges, art, humanities will certainly prove to be as essential as science and technology. And allow me to borrow once again from Oswald's manifesto, let joy be the proof by nines of the whole process, the litmus test of our journey. Dear all, till yesterday, this was my that's all, folks. Borrowed now from the Bug Bunny's cartoon. After all, our meeting was supposed to be rather an informal an informal talk than a lecture, but never an open diary. The death yesterday of Ferreira Goulart changed my mind. He was one of the most important artists, thinker, and political activist for the last 60 years in Brazil. And it illustrates to perfection the idea that art and humanities as a whole can help us focus on the greatest social and political challenges we are confronted with, and think about them critically and passionately at the same time. Goulart, along with Carlos Drummond de Andrade and Manuel Bandeira, make up the triad of the most important Brazilian poets. For his literary work, he received the Camões Award, the most important prize for Portuguese-speaking writers. Along with Hélio Oiticica, and I'm very proud to mention my father-in-law, Pedro Geraldo Scostegui, he became one of the most influential artists and thinkers in the contemporary Brazilian visual arts scene. Arrested, jailed twice, tortured, exiled, Goulart always came back, brandishing the powerful weapons of his sharp criticism and moving passion. He wrote beautiful lyrics for popular and classic music. He was a co-author of a political soap opera for TV network, and he was a fantastic polemist as well. To celebrate his memory and hopefully reinforce argumentation in favor of art and humanities, I will read to you Goulart's poem entitled Disaster, translated into English by Richard Zenef. Some wish their poem to be marble or crystal. I wanted mine to be a peach, a pear, or banana rotting on a plain, preferably on a veranda where people talk and work and can hear the noise from the street. My only ambition is the Roten poem. The Pope wandered, exposed, the voice deep within, festering on the plate, the liquor, the chemistry of syllables, the decaying corpse of metaphors, a poem like a disaster in progress. Thanks for your patience.
My colleague, Professor Danielle Clarke, who's the head of the School of English, Drama and Film, to give the vote of thanks.
I'm not a diplomat. This is slightly intimidating, actually. But I just wanted to just draw things together with a few observations and a few remarks. And one of them is really about UCD's aspirations and interest in global engagement of various kinds. And I think this evening, and also the Kopschitz scholarship itself, is testament to the fact that the global is actually always initially and ultimately local. It's to do with these very specific and personal engagements that we can undertake through initiatives like this that enable us to open up ways of talking to each other, forms of conversation. And as the ambassador's wonderful speech illustrates, that those conversations are wide-ranging. They move across a variety of topics. And one of the great things, I think, is to see the ways in which different things connect with other things. I was particularly struck by the emphasis on the questions of how to make a nation, ideas about plurality and diversity, and how those can coexist with or within an idea of an overarching unity. And of course, as the ambassador quite rightly says, I'm a humanities person, so I'm delighted to see his emphasis on the fundamental importance of arts and humanities in political dialogue and cultural dialogue. But of course, the whole point about that question of how to make a nation, how to make an image of a nation, is all to do with arts, representation, narrative. And it's not a single narrative for a particular moment. It's a narrative that has to be continually rewritten and reinvented. And I think we've seen that here in Ireland in this centenary year very particularly in terms of different ways of understanding the nation and how to think about it and how to commemorate it. I suppose the other observation that I would just like to make very briefly is that the science, and we are rational people, but we're not just rational people. When we determine something through the most abstruse of logic, its impacts or its effects may often be felt emotionally or at some other level that we really need to take account of. So I suppose this is a way of thinking through those questions of the importance of arts and humanities to how we can understand the big issues of our time. Migration was one that was kind of particularly mentioned here. The impact of social media, what the relationship is between the global event and what's happening on your phone in your hand. And I think the humanities can genuinely help us interpret some of those things. So we're both rational and emotional. And I think that one of the things that the humanities can do for us is to underline the importance of empathy, the capacity for dreams, the possibilities for thinking through ideals in a variety of ways. And often, as the allusion to utopian and dystopian indicated, often these dreams and nightmares are rather closer together than we'd like to think. So I'd just like to conclude by thanking His Excellency Ambassador Cardoso for such a wonderful and enriching reflection, I think, on the diplomatic life, but also the relationship between nations, cultures, and how they come to be made. And I'd just like to pay a particular tribute to the Maria Helena Kopschitz Scholarship and how important it is to the school in relation to thinking about wider relationships between between the teaching and thinking about Anglo-Irish literature and Brazil, and more broadly from that about the importance of our engagement beyond the shores of this island. And I don't know why this phrase keeps coming to mind. It's a cliche for those of you in Anglo-Irish, of course, but it's a line from Yeats, which is about about the ambassador's reflections on change, and it's this very famous phrase, which some of you were actually about to predict that I'm going to say, which is that peace comes dropping slow. But I would just like to ask you to put your hands together and give the ambassador our very sincere thanks for a wonderful talk this evening. So thank you.